Hello, my name is Carlos, and I'm going to talk about free market versus centrally planned economies, a discussion on the results of the two systems. First of all, we have to start with some concepts. As the Encyclopedia Britannica defines the free market, it is a system where regulation is minimal and the market is the base for exchange between individuals. This means as long as there is equality before the law and competition remains fair, the market is a tool used for trading. This is a key concept related to liberalism and freedom. Now, what is a central planned economy? Also known as command economy, is a system in which the means of production are publicly owned, and an authority, in this case the state and whoever is in power, decides where the resources are assigned and in which quantity. It is often related to any form of collectivism, socialism, communism, fascism, and progressivism. Sadly, it always implies the use of force, of violent force, because nobody likes their private property taken away. Now, for analyzing the results of the free market, I always like to look at the Index of Economic Freedom published by the Heritage Foundation each year in Washington, D.C. This is a ranking in which many economical parameters are analyzed in each country to determine how free or how unfree they are. The parameters are property rights, judicial effectiveness, government integrity, tax burden, financial freedom, trade freedom, between others. We can see that Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, and Ireland are the freest countries in the world right now. And they are some of the richest countries too. They might not be the biggest economies in the world, but the free market system in there have brought most of the general wellness for their people. Now, where is Ecuador, our country? Ecuador is in the place 949 out of 178 countries. No wonder why the situation here is not like Switzerland. We are just in between some African countries and one step below Argentina. Now, based on empirical evidence, it means in practice, what has the free market bring? What does the free market bring every time it is applied? Well, it brings prosperity, it creates wealth, it creates massive amounts of new workplaces, it brings minimal rates of poverty, innovation, entrepreneurship, and less equality. This might sound bad, but we will discuss it a little later. But for giving some examples, who hasn't used a Microsoft computer? Who hasn't used Microsoft Windows? Who hasn't used an iPhone? Or just a cell phone? Who hasn't played in a PlayStation? And even farther, we are now sending reusable rockets into space thanks to the innovation made in a free economy. Now, what do central planned economies bring every time they are applied? In practice, they bring big government, disrespect for the private property, increasing rates of poverty, increasing politicians' power, unfair competition, which leads to corporatism, intervention failure corrected with more intervention, which leads to what Friedrich Hayek, a famous Austrian economist, defined as the fatal conceit, or fatal arrogance, which is this arrogance that some governants have, thinking that they can think for all the rest of the people, taking decisions for everyone without consulting. And this might sound good, but it's not so much. It brings more equality. We will discuss this a little later. And for giving some facts, I would like to start by giving some examples. Argentina was the richest country in the world at the beginning of the 20th century thanks to the free market economy ideas. But in the first quarter of that century, socialist ideas and central planification were started to being applied, and now Argentina has almost 50% of poverty, big inflation, and many other problems that they are trying to get out of. Venezuela was South America's richest country at some point before the 21st century, thanks to the oil industry. Now, Venezuela has the biggest reserves of oil in the world, and they cannot produce a single barrel. That thanks to the central planification of the government that has made most of the Venezuelan population poor and one of the poorest countries in the region. Private industry is basically inexistent. Cuba was one of the most developed countries in Latin America before 1959, before the Cuban Revolution arrived, and now is one of the poorest countries where violence and repression have been horrible throughout 62 years. Chile is an example of the opposite situation. In Chile, collectivist ideas were already being applied before free market ideas. Free market ideas turned Chile in one of the richest countries in the region and in one of the freest economies in the world, being in place 19 out of 178 countries. South Korea versus North Korea is maybe one of the most famous examples contemporarily talking of what a free market and a central planned economy can do. While South Korea produces cars, cell phones, and TVs, North Korea can even provide a good electricity service to their population, and their population is starving to death. The USSR, or the Soviet Union, is maybe the biggest social experiment in human history, leaving all the social aspects behind, all the repression and all those things. Their economy was a disaster. And that's why at the end of the Soviet Union, they had to start applying market ideas and free market ideas because central planification was not working. They ran out of money and that didn't work anymore. Now, what do numerical facts say? Well, here's a chart on the GDP per capita of Ecuador, Chile, Germany, the biggest economy in Europe, and Singapore, the freest country according to the Index of Economic Freedom of the Heritage Foundation. We can see how all these countries have improved their quality of life throughout history, throughout the years. But Singapore and Germany are particularly bigger, have particularly bigger rates of growing due to freedom. They are also bigger economies too. We have to analyze that in relative terms. But there's an example of what freedom can do and what collectivism can do. Because, in my opinion, Ecuador is not that of a free economy. Here's a chart on the reduction of extreme poverty. Just before the Industrial Revolution, most people were living in extreme poverty, almost 94% of the world population. Now, it is less than 10%. Central planned economies are applied in countries where there are usually authoritarian regimes. And the conservative number of how many people died under collectivist regimes is 150 million, according to a professor in the University of Hawaii. Now, the inequality dilemma, this is what I was talking about before. And I want to say that the unequal distribution of wealth shouldn't be a problem in a prosperous society. Because if you ask me, I'd rather have a society where we are all unequally rich rather than a society where we are equally poor. In the United States, there's a lot of inequalities, but I think that most of the population doesn't lack many basic goods that they need for living. While in countries like Cuba or Venezuela, they are more equal, but people are more equally poor than equally rich. Now, I'd like you to look at these pictures. This is Pyongyang in North Korea. This is Seoul in South Korea. You can see that in North Korea, they don't even seem to have electricity and nobody seems to live in those buildings. While in South Korea, you can find so many beautiful constructions and progress is everywhere. This is Miami, a famous city in the United States where I think most of us have been at least once. And we can see it's beautiful, it's progress, it all seems to be clean. Well, this is Havana in Cuba. These countries, these cities in socialist regimes are filthy. Their people live in poverty. They don't even have 21st century cars, and the houses seem to be falling apart. Now, who is the richest person in the United States? Elon Musk, who is also the richest person in the planet right now. He invented Tesla and SpaceX, and he gives thousands of jobs each year. Who is the richest person, or who was the richest person in Cuba? Fidel Castro, the leader of the Cuban Revolution, who expropriated all private industry and private property out of Cubans and foreigner investors, and turned Cuba's economy into one of the smallest and most problematic in the region. Forbes estimated that Fidel Castro's fortune was $900 million before his death, and he lived like a king, and his family still live like kings and queens, while Cubans have lived in poverty for more than 62 years now. Now, in conclusion, I think that it is clear that I'd rather live in a free market economy and in a free society too. My question to you is, given all these facts and all these conclusions, where would you rather live? In a free market or in a centrally planned economy? Thank you.